Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted. From Packers.com, I am Mike Spofford, joined by my partner in crime, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes here to talk about Packers Buccaneers from Sunday at Raymond James Stadium in hot Tampa. It was a 14-12 final score. We can talk about the offense's hot start, the struggles thereafter, the defense's dominating performance until the final drive, but then they save it with the two-point conversion stop. The bottom line is the Packers are 2-1, and as Aaron Rodgers talked about after the game, considering your schedule was at Minnesota, home against Chicago, at Tampa Bay to start the year, to be 2-1 right now, you take it and move on.
You could have opened the show with anything. We could have talked about the game. You could have brought up your analysis of the most recent Marvel movie. You could have discussed anything under the sun here, Mike, and I was going to respond with the same thing.
Yeah.
Every Friday, Mike Spofford and I, in that spot over there, Matt can't turn the cameras, it's okay, but in that spot, we do final thoughts for road games. And for the first time, when the game ended, I finally said to myself, yeah, not only did we discuss what was going to be the key to victory, what needed to happen for the Packers to win, it actually happened.
Yeah.
The number one thing that you and I both talked about last week was a fast start. And you saw offensively how far a fast start went against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Matt LaFleur talked about it on Monday. When you're facing Tom Brady, you never feel comfortable. There's been enough evidence in the past, Super Bowl related, to show you that he's never quite out of a ball game. But for the Packers to come out, 2 10-plus play drives out of the gate that both produced touchdowns, didn't just get points, they got 7, it was the difference between a potential win and a loss. And being in the locker room afterwards, there were 2 of them. There was offense, defense. You were down with the head coach and the quarterback. Kenny Clark, I thought, had the quote of the night where he said, in the past, these are games typically we haven't won, and we won them. Not only does that tell you about that defense you were talking about, but it tells you about the resolve of that group. The Packers win on the road against a team that had its home opener, and they won.
Yeah.
You can't understate that. For things that need to be corrected, there's plenty of them, but to get a road win in that environment against that quarterback and that team with Super Bowl aspirations, a huge W for Green Bay.
Yeah, and to follow up on what you said with regard to how far a fast start can take you, the Packers got that Buccaneers defense on its heels a little bit, right? Those first 2 drives, 10 plays, 12 plays, 6+ minutes apiece, time of possession. You get 2 touchdowns. The third drive is going just as well. A different type of drive in that you had the big play to Randall Cobb, the 40-yard catch and run. You get into scoring position, and you're knocking on the door to possibly go up 21-3 or at a minimum 17-3, and unfortunately Aaron Jones gets sandwiched at the 2-yard line by a couple of big hits, and the ball pops out. The Buccaneers recover in the end zone, and suddenly everything just changes for Green Bay's offense. And that play, that stop, was the spark that Tampa Bay's defense needed. They kind of snapped out of their doldrums, so to speak, and the rest of the game we saw the Tampa Bay defense that we had seen the first 2 weeks of the season and we expected to see. On the flip side, we saw the Green Bay Packers defense that everybody was hoping to see in the opener at Minnesota. We certainly saw glimpses of it in week 2 in Chicago. And the Packers defensively pretty much played the 4-quarter game that you were hoping for. Yes, Tom Brady drove him 89 yards in the last 3 minutes in the heat. Guys are tired, exhausted. And Brady was Brady. He didn't gash them for some 35, 40-yard pass or anything. He methodically moved them down the field. He had plenty of time. They get the touchdown, and then it comes down to the 2-point conversion. Now, the Packers caught a break here because for all of the wondering, was the touchdown play a delay a game? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. There was no question that the initial try on the 2-point play was delay of game, and they blew the whistle and stopped it. They backed him up 5 yards. I don't know. I'll just preface by saying I don't know how, when essentially from the start of the 4th quarter, when the game is 14-6 and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers know that they are going to go for 2 if they get a touchdown, how you don't have a 2-point play ready to go and called and in the huddle. And they had extra time because the game was paused for a little bit while they were reviewing the Gage touchdown because he took a big hit from Douglas in the end zone. There was some question as to where the ball was and did the ball touch the ground? Did he hang on to it? There was a little bit of a delay there, not an official review where they completely stopped everything, but a delay to confirm that touchdown. And then the Buccaneers still didn't get the snap off in time on the 2-point conversion. Packers catch a break. It goes back to the 7-yard line. You know Brady's going to have to throw it from there. It's not a run-pass decision type of thing. And Devandre Campbell makes the deflection. I don't know how the Buccaneers take a delay a game on a 2-point conversion there. That just stunned me.
Do you know what I loved about this game? You know I'm a big UFC guy. I like my MMA. This reminded me...
One subject we don't talk about, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, this reminded me of your 29-28 decision in a UFC fight. You don't know what that means, but I'm going to educate you a little bit. It's where you go to the judges' scorecards. And in my opinion, the Packers beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 2-point victory, right? How did the Packers win this game? They beat them in every area of the matchup. Think about this. The running game. Green Bay's, it wasn't overly productive, but they had 12 carries between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Running game for Tampa Bay. Leonard Fournette wasn't able to get much going. Only, 12 carries.
Yeah.
Didn't get much going. Rodgers, early on, being able to finish those drives, get points. That's what Tampa Bay was unable to do. Pat O'Donnell out-punted Tampa Bay. They won the field position battle. You go through all these different check marks. Well, you go to your final play that you're talking about there. Matt LaFleur discussed with Joe Barry, okay, we're on our heels right now. Tampa Bay's driving. It might come down to a 2-point play. Have your play ready.
Absolutely.
Tampa Bay, now to be fair to Byron Leftwich in this offense, they're trying to just get back in this thing. They're trying to get in the end zone to get that 2-point conversion. The burden of proof is on them a little bit more. But still, as you outline with all those different variations and all those different scenarios that were playing out, to be in a spot in which you take a delay a game at that juncture of the game, you can't do it.
Unbelievable.
And I don't know all the ins and outs of what Green Bay saw, but Devandre Campbell mentioned in the locker room afterwards, Green Bay was ready for that look. When the receiver motions, when Russell Gage motions back in line the way he did, that tipped off in the Packers' head, and as they said, there's no guarantees, but from what they've seen on film, that it looks like it's going to be a snag concept. It looks like they know where guys are going to go. And when you watch that play, every single Green Bay defender is where they're supposed to be.
Yep.
Campbell is in zone coverage. 6'4" with his vertical, goes up and tips that ball. The Green Bay Packers get a victory.
Yeah, I have my What You Might Have Missed with the video clips this week, which is now on our website, packers.com, as we speak. I broke down a lot of Devandre Campbell's pass coverage, and then culminating, of course, in the 2-point play. And when you look really closely at the 2-point play at the end, you can see, as you said, Wes, the Packers had everything covered. Leonard Fournette comes out of the backfield. Adrian Amos picks him up. Cameron Brate, the tight end, does a stop route at the goal line. Eric Stokes is right with him. And then with Gage running the corner route, which is essentially he's running the corner route off of the stop route. The stop route by the tight end is supposed to draw the defense in, and then the corner route is supposed to be open. And Darnell Savage sprints to stick with Gage on the corner route, and he's all over him. And then, so Campbell's your zone guy, while those other guys are kind of matched up man-to-man as these routes develop, and he can just watch Brady's eyes to see where does he want to go with the football. And as you said, 6'4", you can't coach 6'4" at linebacker, and that reach, the length that he has, he gets the deflection, it falls incomplete. The Packers then recover the onside kick. The culmination of, as you said, a victorious day for the special teams, where the Packers had the edge in that phase of the game with the way Pat O'Donnell punted. Unfortunately, catching a bad break on the running into the punter thing in the back of the end zone, which cost the Packers a whole bunch of field position. That's kind of a story for another day. But even with that, the Packers won on special teams overall in this game with regard to the field position, and then a smooth, no drama recovery of an onside kick sort of capped that off. A really good day for Rich Bisaccia's unit.
I was really surprised, and I don't know what the philosophy is with how they handle their onside kicks for the Bucs. I was really surprised that they tested Lazard over Romeo Dobbs, who was the other option. If you watch the film, Lazard has been with, Devontae Adams was the featured guy there all those years,
right.
But Lazard was the opposite one. Robert Tonyan did a little bit of it. They decided to go after Lazard, and it was a solid onside kick attempt, but Allen is just so zoned in, and he's so experienced at it and so composed. Everybody did their job. I mean, I don't know if you want to dovetail into this right away, but just the way that Rich Bisaccia has coached these units, what a good, solid, disciplined special teams coordinator can do is take the talent that he has, take the players that are available, and maximize their strengths. I think about that from your Jack Cocos as your long snappers that weren't long snappers that suddenly are NFL long snappers and is doing a solid job. I think about Pat O'Donnell and a guy that, Chicago let him hit the market, and the Packers scooped him up immediately.
Yeah.
Rudy Ford gets cut by Jacksonville. Rudy Ford is suddenly, every single time, right in the punt returner's face as a flyer. Keyshawn Nixon coming in, not only in relief of Jair Alexander and playing 57 defensive snaps, but playing on all the core special teams units, grabbing a ball that ends up landing at the 2-yard line. Mike, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I'm not trying to rip on anything, but when was the last time that you recall the Packers being able to kill a punt at a 2-yard line? And then the implications that had for where that drive went for the Buccaneers that go 3 and out. All those little things matter. And I think for the Green Bay Packers perspective, getting more consistency, more durability, more discipline from their special teams units today, this was the game, Mike, where they weren't just a push. They were the advantage that Green Bay has been looking for from the defense.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a handful of guys to talk about in terms of whether you want to call them the heroes of the game or the unsung heroes of the game. We mentioned a little bit already with Devandre Campbell, not just the deflection on the 2-point conversion, but 14 tackles in this game. Had several other good, solid plays in pass coverage as well as against the run. You had mentioned how Fournette couldn't get going. Kenny Clark ends up with 2 sacks and was a force against the run all day long. Romeo Dobbs, the rookie receiver, 8 receptions, gets his first NFL touchdown. The 8 receptions, only 1 shy of the single game Packers rookie record, which was Max McGee's 9 catches back in 1954.
Tobin Rote was on one that day.
Yeah, so Romeo Dobbs was close to setting a rookie record, and maybe he'll get that one at some point in a game this year. And a couple guys we've already mentioned too, Keyshawn Nixon and Pat O'Donnell. Nixon having to step in. Alexander leaves the game with a groin injury on the opening series of the game. So then the rest of the way, Keyshawn Nixon has to balance being the nickel corner and then also his special teams duties. He ended up on the field for a total of, I believe it was more than 70 snaps.
73 snaps.
73 snaps, more than any other player for the Packers when you combine his defense and special team snaps. Nixon really, really balled out for this team. And then Pat O'Donnell, as Rich Bisaccia talked about last week, sort of all the different clubs in his bag as a golfer in terms of the way he can punt the ball, the style of punt, where he wants to place it, the coverage that the Packers have. The Buccaneers had to start so many drives at their 20 or worse, and the Packers defense had so much field to defend. The one time the Buccaneers did have a short field, the Packers defense rose up and stopped him and made him kick a field goal there in the third quarter after Aaron Rodgers threw an interception. So just so many things about this game for the Packers, even with all of the offensive struggles from drive number 4 all the way until the end of the game. This was a game where all of the phases had to do their part, and they did just enough to get it against a darn good team that was undermanned, just like the Packers were. Green Bay was missing receivers. The Buccaneers were missing receivers. The offensive line situation, Donovan Smith not playing. The Packers were rotating. David Bakhtiari, Yosh Nijman at left tackle. That was another story in this game. But when the Buccaneers are back to full strength, just as when the Packers are back to full strength, these are two teams that we're going to be talking about at the end of this thing, and we'll see maybe if there's a rematch on the horizon.
Yeah, and the other guy too, if you want to talk about like Keyshawn Nixon as an unsung hero, gets his first career forced fumble. The other guy that I thought was like the unsung hero was Jaren Reed. When you look at Kenny Clark had 2 sacks, and Kenny deserved those sacks. What the plays that he's created the last 2 weeks to not have one yet, that was a travesty. So it's nice to see him get rewarded for that. But on one of those sacks that that Kenny had, it was Jaren Reed splitting a double team in which he was getting held to force Brady to come up in the pocket and create a sack opportunity.
And almost got Brady down himself. Brady was able to keep his balance enough, which is why Clark ends up getting credit for the sack because Reed didn't get him on the ground. But Reed, against the double team, almost got Brady on the ground by himself.
So then what ends up happening for him later on when Keyshawn Nixon gets the forced fumble, Reed is the one that's jumping on top of it. Quay Walker gets a forced fumble earlier in the game. Darnell Savage is jumping on it. When you talk about total complete team victories, this was what you're discussing. Because, Mike, I know there were some people in Insider Inbox this week asking about, well, what happened to the offense? What happened to the defense late? Why are they back in prevent defense? The one thing people need to understand is they were not taking on that is a good football team. I don't want to use any disparaging language towards any other team right now.
Right.
But that was not, you're not facing a low FCS school there. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as you indicated, are going to be in this thing. For Green Bay to hold off that charge, I thought said a lot. And it just came from so many different areas. David Bakhtiari playing 35 snaps, his biggest workload since tearing his ACL a year and a half ago. Yosh Nijman and him agreeing to do the rotation. There's just, when Matt LaFleur did his post-game celebration and his speech to his guys, it is one of those games which I think are the most rewarding ones where you can point to all 48 guys that were up on that roster and say that each one of you have had something to do with this thing.
Yeah, that was a big one. That was a big one for the Packers to get. Also, in the sense that the way the game started and the way the defense played for 57 minutes, it would have been such a shame to let that one get away. And we all know what that feels like when it's a game that you should win, the way it's unfolding, the way you're controlling all three phases of the game, as you had talked about. And sometimes in the NFL, these games get away from you. I mean, just ask the Buffalo Bills, who were down in Miami and ran 90 offensive plays to Miami's 39 and gained 497 yards to Miami's 212 and had 11 third down conversions to Miami's 3. And the Buffalo Bills lost the football game. And you get on that flight home from Florida, coincidentally, and then you're sitting there wondering, how in the world did we lose that football game? The Packers found a way to win it, and that's what it takes in this league, especially right now with this Green Bay team where you're still going through the transition at receiver. You're trying to get Romeo Dobbs more involved. Had no choice but to be more involved because of the injuries, and the young man came through. You're trying to get your offensive line healthy. This defense is now finding its legs, establishing itself, the unit that we saw in training camp against the New Orleans Saints in those 2 joint practices. The Packers are getting there, and the fact that, there's plenty of stuff to work on, but the fact that they're getting there and they're 2-1 with 2 of arguably their toughest road trips of the year are out of the way now, that's a pretty good spot, big picture-wise, to be in.
And I was asked a question in Insider Inbox, which I thought was a really good question, which was, other than, a week earlier, Matt LaFleur had talked about if we don't have Elton Jenkins back, we don't know if we win this game. I don't know if we win this game. Somebody asked me that, but they said, if it's not Aaron Rodgers, who needed to play for the Packers to win this thing? I've said Romeo Dobbs, and I said Devandre Campbell. And Romeo, you give him a lot of credit, as you outlined, with the game he had, the way he started that thing, really critical. But that precondition that the guy put in there of Rodgers, I thought was really important because this is a game where, as much that was made out of Rodgers and Brady this week from the outside, it was a game where you needed a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers to handle the situation he was presented. When we got done with this whole thing, and I'm starting to look back at the highlights on video afterwards, I was blown away by how talented Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady are. And I am fully convinced if Tom Brady wanted to, he could test 50 because of the way he has mastered that position. Mike, I watch Sunday Night Football. I watch Monday Night Football. Quarterback play shouldn't look that effortless.
Right.
And those 2 guys...
especially against good defenses.
Yeah. And those 2 guys gave their teams a chance to win. And that's what the greats do. That side of it, in kind of a knockdown, drag-out war, is just really something special to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. A little sponsor business here, Wes. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50 years of better. All right, I want to talk a little bit about what else happened in Week 3 in the NFL. First and foremost being that with the Packers beating the Buccaneers, but then also Buffalo losing, as I mentioned, Kansas City losing on the road at Indianapolis, the New York Giants losing at home on Monday night to the Dallas Cowboys, suddenly there are only 2 undefeated teams after 3 weeks of the season, and that's the Miami Dolphins and the Philadelphia Eagles, 2 teams the Packers will play, both on the road later this season. But here we are, Wes. There's only 2 3-0 teams left to go in the NFC North. 3 teams are at 2-1 with the Packers, the Vikings, and the Bears, following Minnesota's comeback win over Detroit and Chicago pulling out a walk-off field goal victory over Lovie Smith and the Houston Texans. I want to get your thoughts a little bit on the Minnesota-Detroit game, because Detroit looked like it had this game won a few times. They jumped out 14-0. Minnesota comes back, ties at 14-all. Then in the second half, the Lions get ahead 24-14, but then they let it get away and they lose 28-24 on a 30-some yard touchdown pass where KJ Osborne's wide open with like 30 seconds left in the game, and the Vikings escape at home from a Lions team that gave them absolutely everything they could handle. That's a result that could have some pretty big implications here as the rest of the NFC North season unfolds. But Minnesota 2-1, just like the Packers and Bears.
Yep, yeah, and you tip your cap to Minnesota for winning that type of matchup. Certainly having it at their place, I think, definitely helped. Detroit is interesting to me. They're probably maybe the most interesting team in the NFC right now, just because of all the things that they have going for themselves. Whether it's their first round pick and the impact he's been making early on. It looks like Jeff Okudah has put the Achilles injury behind him, the slow start behind him. He did a bang-up job against Justin Jefferson. But ultimately, Mike, as many things happened in this game, it really told me this. The Detroit Lions are going to go as far as DeAndre Swift takes them. They are a different offense when he's either not available or working through some stuff. Give credit to Jamal Williams, did a fine job in that game. But
yeah,
Swift,
Williams had a solid game.
Swift is their home run hitter, and everything, it seems like, with Jared Goff changes based on his availability. I thought this was one of those matchups. And to Minnesota's credit, they had to work through their own issues with Delvin Cook, and they did it. And they were able to get that victory and certainly bounce back after a big letdown in Week 2.
Well, a lot of questions in Detroit with regard to the decisions at the end of the game with the 4th and 4 when earlier in the fourth quarter, and Dan Campbell had been going for it on 4th down all throughout the game. There's a 4th and 1 in the fourth quarter. The Lions are up by 3. They pass on I believe it would have been about a 48, 49-yard field goal, and the kicker had missed from 48 yards earlier in the game. They go for it on 4th and 1. They don't get it. They're presented with a similar situation with just over a minute to go. It's 4th and 4, and it's a 54-yard field goal with the kicker having missed from 48 earlier in the game. And then Campbell, after going for it on 4th down all day long, decides to try the 54-yard field goal. The kicker misses it badly. Minnesota then takes over the ball at the 44-yard line with great field position. And quite frankly, Campbell owned it. Said, yeah, I made the wrong decision there. I should have stuck with what they'd been doing throughout the course of the game, which was to go for it on 4th down and keep the ball in their offense's hands. And unfortunately, you can do so much, and we almost saw it in the Packers game. As I said, the 57 minutes with what this defense had done against Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. You can do so much right in a football game for 50 minutes, for 55, for 59 and a half minutes. And something, a decision, one play, a bad bounce, a bad call, something can go wrong, and it can cost you a victory, and it can be so demoralizing. And yet this league is all about how do you pick yourself back up and keep going, because as Matt LaFleur likes to say, nobody cares about your adversity, right? Everybody's got another game the next week, and you have to get ready to go play and try to chalk up a W, whatever it takes.
There's one aspect of the Campbell thing that bothered me, though, and you and I discussed this on the plane ride home. He's right about the 54-yarder and about going for it on fourth down, but it reminds me, and I don't want to say the player because I want to make sure I don't misrepresent what his words were, but I remember about 15 years ago, I think there was a Brewers player that talked, maybe 10 years ago, talked about, his philosophy at the plate. And for boiling down and making a long story short, he basically surmised it to, he basically makes up his mind on what he's doing before the pitch even comes. That's kind of what this fourth down thing sort of felt like with me with Campbell. It's like, it's great to have confidence in your guys and do all this, but I think at some point you need to have a little bit of analysis and a little bit of self-reflection on the situation, because otherwise it isn't that you're necessarily being aggressive or a riverboat guy or anything. It's just, no, you're just sort of, that's what you are.
Yeah.
And if you flip a coin enough times or you bet on red enough times, it's going to come up black. So, like, I think there needs to be some game situation awareness in there as well. You respect what he's doing, but I think if you flip that coin too many times or you keep, betting on that same color, it's eventually going to, you're going to come up with craps. And for the Lions, it sort of worked out that way.
Well, and it's also difficult from a leadership standpoint too, because those decisions and how the game unfolds, and then the decisions you make in crunch time, it sends certain messages to your guys, right? And what I think is difficult in that spot is when you've gone for it on fourth down 5 times in the game, you've converted 4 out of 5. Mm-hmm. You were 4 out of 4 until they stopped you on a 4th and 1. But yet you're not 100% confident in your kicker making a 54-yarder. Yeah. And yet at 4th and 4, then suddenly that's the moment with 1:10 on the clock that you tell your offense, nope, we're going to kick it this time.
That's why they make the big bucks.
Yeah, exactly. That's why these guys get paid the big bucks, and they have to answer for it. But here we are, Wes, as I started with this review of Week 3. 3 weeks into the NFL season, there have been, according to a statistic I saw on ESPN, there have been 18 games in the NFL decided by 3 points or fewer, which is the most ever in the first 3 weeks of an NFL season. And only 2 out of 32 teams are unblemished at this point at 3-0. Buckle up, right? There are 14 regular season games left plus the playoffs. This is going to be some wild ride here in the NFL in 2022.
Exactly, Mike. And there is one team that's 0-3 in the Las Vegas Raiders. And when you talk about those close, narrow victories or close, narrow losses in their case, that shows you the margin for error in this league.
Absolutely.
Matt LaFleur says it so much, and he jokes about it. He says it's a cliche, but it is not easy to win in this league. Just look at the Raiders. Just as easily as the Miami Dolphins are 3-0, the Raiders are 0-3.
Right.
That's just the way this thing works. And for the Green Bay Packers, as Aaron Rodgers said after the game, to be 2-1 after their first 3, coming back into this home stretch or friendlier stretch now, you're feeling pretty good about things.
Yeah, no question about it. With that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. For Wes, I'm Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.